I think that one of the most common root causes of overwhelm is the feeling that everything is important right now. The feeling that everything is important right now is so overwhelming because I'm pulled in 15 different directions and I can't do 15 different things right now. So when I'm like, okay, I could do one thing right now, and I pick that one thing and I block out everything else, there might even be like a sense of loss of like everything else that I'm not doing right now. But then I'm doing the one thing I'm doing right now and I'm not overwhelmed because it's just one thing and it's just right now.
Hey, I'm Esther, and you are listening to On Your Own, the podcast for Jewish girls living away from home. Each week, we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you confidently navigate life on your own so you can achieve real growth and independence and take ownership of this foundational stage of your life. For additional resources, tips, and to stay up to date on future episodes, sign up for the On Your Own newsletter, linked below in the description. Looking forward to spending some time with you today. And now, to this week's episode. Hello and welcome back to On Your Own. My guest today is Chana Greenstein. Chana is a work-life balance coach, copywriter, and host of the LifeWorks Podcast. In today's episode, we discuss the real definition of life balance, how to take back control of your time, overcoming overwhelm, getting in touch with your inner world, the sacrifices of success, and much more. Leaving home and figuring out how to spend your time becomes a real challenge, either because there are just so many options in front of you and you don't know which one to choose when, or because your time is so limited, it's being dictated to you by your school or your seminary or your college. And so it's really hard to figure out what to do, when to do it, and how to choose our time in a way that makes us feel balanced and at peace and focused and productive. Our conversation today sheds a light on all of this and gives so many helpful tools and so much helpful advice to help you figure out how to spend your time and how to choose what you want to spend your time on. I really hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I learned so much, especially I learned about what the true definition of balance really is, how it actually is achievable, and the incredible impact that it can have on your life. Let's get into the episode. Chana, welcome, first of all. So good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
So I wanted to start with just hearing a bit of how you got into this subject of balance, work-life balance. How'd you get here?
Yeah, so it was a journey and it actually happened pretty organically. I was building my own marketing business and I've always been like obsessed with self-development and doing things as best as I could possibly do them. I love like understanding psychology and why we do what we do and how we could do it better. Just as like, it was always a part of my life. I was always reading those books and investing in listening to TED Talks and hearing what they had to say, things like that. And then as I was growing my business, I was applying these tips to how I was growing my business. And then as I started to, Baruch Hashem, build a family, they started to just be so much more meaningful and important because efficiency and productivity really mattered when my time was so limited, and any time that I was spending in my business, I wasn't spending with my family, and I was juggling that much more. And so I was really, really invested in figuring out how to make this work as best as I possibly could for myself. And one of my marketer friends that I collaborated with on a bunch of projects once said to me, "I love how you do this. I love how you run things. I love how you're so efficient and organized. Can you give a masterclass?" I said yes. Put the word out just to like the people I knew in my network that I was giving this masterclass on Zoom. And I think 60 something women attended. And I was flying high for days after. And I was like, I love this. And this is where I want to be. I know how my own personal life transformed from the work I was doing on my own. And simultaneously, at the time that I'd given this masterclass, I had just started working with a coach. So I had really been like, really invested in taking this work to the next level, like figuring it out for myself. And then I just saw how there were women out there that also wanted that, and it maybe didn't come as naturally to them as it came to me, or they just didn't even have the resources or know where to turn or where to look um, for those resources and how to do it. And I was just like, I just want everyone to know this, and if I want to be the one to share it with them if I can. And it just really took off from there.
That's awesome. How would you define balance before we get into everything about it? Like, what's your definition of balance and a balanced life?
Yeah, such a juicy question. Um, this question usually comes to me in the form of, is balance attainable?
Hmm.
Or like, is that even a real thing? And I think most women are under the impression that balance, the concept of balance, was created to give them an unachievable goal that they will be working towards their whole lives, never achieve, and always feel bad about themselves. And I'm like, no. Then I think we're looking at balance as something we have. And the way that I see balance is, it's not something we have. It's not something you can see on your calendar. It's about how you feel. And feeling in balance, when you're there, you know it. You know what it feels like. It comes with a sense of peace and a groundedness in where you are.
So you're saying if you would look at somebody, you wouldn't know if they're in balance. You can only know for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, listen, there are people that give off energies, and I think that a balanced person gives off a more calming energy. So, in that way, I think that it's possible to pick up as an outsider, but we're under the impression that balance maybe has to do with how my schedule looks or how my time is divided between the different roles I play. And I don't think that's it, because I mean, then like who's to say what the ratio is, right? That's balanced. And like, it almost doesn't even matter if you're frazzled and overwhelmed and exhausted and fragmented. Like, who cares if you achieved the goal of having your calendar look a certain way? And so I really think that, at least the way that I see balance as a valuable thing to work towards, it's something inside.
This podcast is for girls who are kind of just starting out their lives in the real world. And I find that a lot of the perspective I see and that I had was, this is my time to go all in, to have adventure, to maybe try extremes, which sounds like the opposite of balance. So what pitch could you give to a girl who's now, life is at her fingertips? How would feeling balanced help her?
Yeah. So I think that anybody at any stage knows why feeling balanced is something valuable, is something to go after. Because at the end of the day, when you're getting into bed at night, if you feel fragmented and exhausted, whether it's because you are like on the cusp of, right, everything exciting, and you're able to fill up your days however you want, or it's because you're juggling a family of a bunch of kids with a job, it at the end of the day, you want to be able to get into bed feeling just comfortable with where you are and with what you experienced. And you don't want to have to rely on your external experiences to dictate to you how to feel, because that's a little bit risky, because we don't necessarily get to choose what our experiences are. And so you know how you want to feel when you're getting into bed, how you want to feel comfortable with where you are, with how you chose to spend your time, and with who you are internally in your internal landscape, maybe because of or even despite what's going on in your life. And so I don't think that it has to mean not going all in and having adventures, but it's about always coming back to you, like who you really are at your core. And that could happen through like very conscious practices like journaling and exploration. And I mean, I could give you, journaling questions to ask yourself. But at the end of the day, it's about like staying true to you and finding those tools that you need to navigate whatever it is that you're doing or experiencing, by choice or not, to be able to have that sense of, different people would probably describe it differently, but it's a certain sense of control, which is, it's not really something we aim for, but it's something that feels good, right? Like, as opposed to feeling like my life is completely spiraling out of control and I don't get to choose whether it's how I spend my time or how I feel about things, to be able to have that peace of mind. so that your brain is not always running away from you. Again, different people like different aspects, speak to them or stand out for them, but everybody values that ability to have that inner peace.
Would you say that balance and peace would be synonymous here?
I don't know if I would call them synonymous, but I think they're very intertwined, very related. The more imbalanced you are, the easier it will be for you to get to a place of feeling at peace. And I think that balance is often going to come with a lot of acceptance of life circumstances, whatever they might be. And so that's not always going to feel peaceful, but there's a certain sense of peace that does come with just accepting things as they are, because I'm not fighting them. So am I overjoyed about them? Not necessarily, but yeah, there's in a certain way I'm at peace with the way things are.
Hmm. So I'm hearing a lot come up, like when things aren't necessarily going the way you expected them to go. When things are, let's say, outside of your control, which for a lot of girls is the case, unless they kind of took a year off after high school to do their own thing, which usually it's the less common thing. Usually your schedule is dictated by somebody else. Even your volunteering is dictated by other people. So, what about someone who either doesn't feel so much control over the things that she's investing her time and energy in, or who, maybe this is a separate question, or whose expectations for what her time would be going into looks very different than what she thought? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say, I want to talk to you and let's schmooze this out. But we can't do that on a podcast, right? Um, yeah, so I think that the reason that it's coming up a lot when things don't look the way you would want them to or expect them to is because that's when we struggle most um, to find these feelings of balance and peace of mind and acceptance, right? And all that, all the good stuff. But the truth is that really, because your inner world exists independent of your outer world, or can exist independent of your outer world, there are so many people whose time looks exactly the way they would tell you they dream of it looking, and whose life is living up to their expectations, who don't feel any of those good things, because it really is an inner work to develop an inner landscape and an inner self that has that resilience and that ability to look at things that way. Practically, um, if someone's time is out of their control, which could happen for all sorts of, and in all sorts of ways and all sorts of reasons, I think that there are a few things to look at. One would be, where can you exert like your own autonomy over your time? So you might not get to choose how you spend your time, but you get to choose how you do the thing that you didn't choose to do. And so where can you make whatever you're doing yours? And how can you inject your own personality or your own twist or your own spin on, let's say, volunteer work that you might not have chosen to do, but now that you're here, how are you going to make it yours? How are you going to give yourself that sense of autonomy? There's also like where, similarly, but where do you have tiny little pockets of time that you do get to choose? And just acknowledging and consciously making that decision of like, and now I'm going to eat breakfast and choose what I eat for breakfast, can give you that sense of autonomy when you might have been making those decisions anyway. But if you weren't conscious of the fact that you were making those decisions and that they were your decisions to make, it just doesn't feel the same. So a lot of really just being cognizant and aware of what you do get to choose, and then choosing consciously. And I would also speak to, again, just like the completely inner side, when there's like nothing practical to even do, but just to recognize that if I don't get to choose how I spend my time, so I'm choosing it however it's being dictated anyways, I could do it happy, I could do it unhappy. And it's really, really my choice. And I think that for me, one of the most like magnificently transformative parts of my journey, which was really a huge chunk, but took place like when it clicked in my brain, it was a split second, was realizing that really I'm in control of pretty much everything. And again, because I'm not, but I always get to choose how I do things and how I feel when I do the things. So like there is so much that I'm in control of. Um, and just that realization of like, even, um, and for some people this is helpful and for some people it's not. So I'm like putting these things out there. If they resonate, run with it. If they don't, you might want to try it anyway and then decide. But you never have to like want to take it, love any of my suggestions. They're just suggestions of things to try. Something that I suggest is when someone finds themselves saying I can't, to explore that. So for a girl listening to this podcast, it might be like, I can't spend my Wednesday afternoon doing what I want to do because I have to volunteer in whatever capacity. And the question is, do you really have to? I mean, maybe you were told that you have to. You could disobey. You probably could not show up. I mean, are they taking you handcuffed? And so for some people this is not helpful, but for some it's like this, I'm choosing to go because I don't want to suffer the consequences of not going. Again, is empowering. Like, it's not that I have to, it's not that somebody else decided for me. It's that the way things are right now, I could and I could not. And there are, pros and cons to going and to not going. And I'm going to choose to go because maybe not going will really not turn out pleasant for anybody. But just again, recognizing that you might not be as like handcuffed into your life as we sometimes think could be really, really empowering. And this applies very often to scenarios that not necessarily other people or institutions, right? Or like whatever program we're in has made decisions for us, but we just feel like, I can't do the thing. And then when you explore that, you're like, I can, I'm actually just lazy, or like I can, but I'm terrified. Or even like I can, but I don't want to. There is a part of me that wants to. And then the part of me that doesn't is telling me that I can't, because that's a much easier way to get out of it than admitting that I don't want to.
So
Oh my gosh, I could talk about this for hours.
I remember my
Yeah,
father, I don't know if he used to do this on purpose or what his point was, but when I was in a circumstance where I was really complaining, like I flew overseas to do day camp or even in seminary at one point, if I'd complain enough to him, he'd be like, okay, come home. I'm going to buy you a ticket. I'm buying you a ticket tonight. And that like flipped it for me. I was like, no, I want to stay here. I want to make it work. But I don't,
right,
that kind of just, you could leave, and I actually heard
right,
once on a podcast about parenting, like about being a mom. It's like, you could leave. Like, I sounded
right.
so radical at the moment, but it's like, you could disappear right now. Like, you could ditch your kids. You could do it. It's a terrible thing, but you could. So the fact that you're not,
Yeah,
like, you're choosing that. The fact that you're not
yeah,
leaving seminary, you're not leaving camp, like, in some capacity, you're choosing that.
right.
That's empowering. You mentioned
Yeah.
like this difference between the inner self and the outer self. It's something that I still struggle with. That when my outside circumstances are doing well, I'm happy and I'm positive and I'm full of gratitude. When they're not, I'm just the complete opposite. Um, I'm very influenced by my outside circumstances. So, how are we able to separate those two things?
We all are, Esther. We're all very influenced. Um, but there are things we could do, and it does sometimes get easier with time and with practice. Um, so I think that there are like so many directions I could take this. Something I talk about a lot is I'll just take a specific example because it's just easier, I think, to hear it in specifics. Something I talk about a lot is overwhelm, because I primarily work with very busy moms, most of whom own businesses, and they are very, very, very overwhelmed. And the idea that your circumstances could be overwhelming and you don't have to be overwhelmed is, it's radical to some, but I think it's true. And it better be true, because my circumstances are overwhelming and I don't always want to live in overwhelm. It's really exhausting. So figuring out how to make that true was very important for me. And I think that just in the moment, when you feel your outer circumstances like dictating to you how to feel, first of all, that's normal. And I think that reacting to our circumstances is, I mean, that's how we're wired. That's how we're supposed to be. And allowing that to happen is part of the process. So it doesn't mean like ignoring what's going on around me. It means taking it all in and reacting and then working through that reaction so that it's not necessarily more than a reaction. I could react and then feel differently for the rest of the day. So there are a few different things to do, but I think that sort of making our strengthening or like bringing forth our inner world with the knowledge that it doesn't have to be dictated by our outer world is really helpful. So one way that we could do that is by talking out loud. Very often when someone's overwhelmed with like there are a million things going on, I will recommend like out loud say stop. Because usually what happens is when there are a million things going on around you, you're not only overwhelmed by a million things going on around you, you're also overwhelmed by then your brain chatter, which is reflecting all the things going on around you. So like, oh my gosh, there are a million things going on. How am I going to get all done? And if I have to do this now and that, then I'm never going to make it out the door and we're going to be up till midnight and I'm never going to handle the project. Then next week, I'm still going to be stressed that I never, right? And like, stop. And then it like brings you back. This moment is rarely like too much or too overwhelming or too negative or difficult to deal with. Like just one moment is usually bearable, whatever is going on in that moment. And so when we're able to come out of that, whether it's mind swirl about how the past, the future, or how bad, like just catastrophizing what's going on and literally just deal with what's right in front of us right now, that could be very helpful. And like I said, say it out loud. That's like externalizing your internal self. You're like taking your internal world and you're saying it out loud. So it's like something, to interrupt and bring it outwards. There are so many things to do, but generally it's going to be something more tangible because our inner world is like so not tangible. So it could be saying an affirmation. It could be striking a power pose. It could be smiling. I could be starting to sing and dance. Like, give me specific examples and we could speak to those. But in general, start with the knowledge and the real like belief. You have to know it. You have to really, really know it that you get to choose how you feel. You do. And sometimes it really doesn't feel that way. And we all have reactions. And those are fine. Like in the first, few seconds when we're reacting to an event, I don't think that's, even in like Mustersparm, that's not counted towards, that's not like how we're not measured up against those moments because they are considered to be, outside of our control. But now what? Like now that I had that instinctive reaction, so I see what this moment means to me, how am I going to how am I going to choose to feel however I want to feel now? And sometimes like I don't want to feel joyous, right? But I want to feel okay. Or I want to feel like I have a grip on things. It's not always going to be to sing and dance, but knowing that I get to choose how I feel and then using that to influence how I'm going to feel by taking action in whatever way is going to be helpful for me is the direction to go.
Would you say that majority of the overwhelm comes from our minds, even if things are stressful outside?
Yes.
And so putting a stop on the mind would then ground us into the present moment, which is never as overwhelming as our mind makes it out to be.
Yes. I think that one of the most common root causes of overwhelm is the feeling that everything is important right now. When I'm pulled in 15 directions, it's really overwhelming. But when I recognize and like the work that I do, it's not always, as like fun, as exciting. Sometimes it's just like, yeah, we're really limited. Now I accept that. Now I work with that. That is so much more fun and exciting than spending my entire life trying to achieve things I can't achieve because I'm really limited, but I won't admit it. So the feeling that everything is important right now is so overwhelming because I'm pulled in 15 different directions and I can't do 15 different things right now. So when I'm like, okay, I could do one thing right now and I pick that one thing and I block out everything else, there might even be like a sense of loss of like everything else that I'm not doing right now. But then I'm doing the one thing I'm doing right now and I'm not overwhelmed because it's just one thing and it's just right now.
How do we pick that one thing? When there's so many options, what if they're all good options? I could hang out with my friends. I could take a nap.
Yeah.
I could go study. How do you choose?
That is the $1 million question. So Oh my gosh, there's so many ways to go about this, but I would say that proactively planning your time in advance is the best way to preempt this question. Yesterday, Chana is always smarter and more mature and more responsible and more efficient than right now, Chana. So the schedule I made yesterday is always going to be a lot smarter and more responsible and more mature than what I'm in the mood of doing right now. And so if I'm just going to make decisions in the moment, they're going to be very much influenced by how much sleep I got last night and what I ate today and how, who I just bumped into and what comments they made. And if I plan my schedule in advance, that very much contributes to me building a schedule that I actually want, as opposed to one that's just influenced by my moods. In the moment, it could be a really hard question to answer. And you really want to remember that I love to visualize my time as a closet. And just like my closet could be messy, my time could be messy, my closet could be organized, so could my time. And when I pick up a stack of sweaters and I put them into my closet, nothing else can go where that stack of sweaters is. And so when I choose to do something now, there is nothing else that could go in that time slot. And so just remembering that if I'm putting this in here, then I'm choosing this above everything else for that time slot could be helpful in making that decision. And sometimes there is like two things that I really want to do, and I have to choose between them, and it's not easy.
Well, let's say we're the night before and we're thinking of the day. For someone who doesn't yet have clarity on, even in advance, what's important to them. For example, girl in seminary, the next day during her break, she could be going out with friends. She could be going out with this group of friends. She could be going out with that group of friends. She could stay home and do laundry. She could learn something. She could take a walk, and she doesn't know what is the right thing, even in advance. What can help her make that decision?
I would start with the question, what do you want to do? So instead of asking, what should I do? And what's the right thing to do? I would start with, what do I want to do? And then I would look at, if I do the thing I want, what's not going to get done? And am I okay with that? I think that it's much easier to get clarity around what we want. I don't know if I should say much easier, but when it's a skill that's easier to learn, because what you want is always inside. And oh my gosh, like we could talk about this for hours, but our soul's voice is always calm and constant and quiet and steady. Like it's there. And when we're looking at what we should do, I mean, depends who you ask, right? Everyone's going to have a different piece of advice and everyone's going to have a different opinion. And and this applies always. You know, your mother will think one thing, your sister will think another, your friends will think another. And so when we're asking, what should I do? We're essentially looking like outside of us for the answer, because what should I do is like whatever's dictated by, whoever gets to decide what's right. And that's not always going to be a very cohesive answer. And then it's going to be really hard to do all the things that we should do. And so when we start by just turning inside, we get this like, when you're able to tune into that like frequency and hear that voice, it's always there. And it's always there to provide you with answers. And sometimes it's like, I want to do that, but then my laundry won't be washed and I will literally have nothing to wear, which I might be fine with pulling something out of the hamper. But if I'm not, I might choose to wash the laundry anyway. But I think it's a good place to start, because you start by asking a question that really has an answer that you're able to find, and then seeing like, what are the consequences of going with that? And if they're bearable, then go with it. And if they're not, then you know what you have to tweak, because you're like, oh, wait, I really need to wash the laundry. Now you know what you should do.
So I've always thought of balance as like those pie charts, where they kind of cut, all the important parts of your life and they cut them up into like 20%, 5 most important categories. But what it's sounding like is that, well, first of all, I found that that's really, really difficult, because the moment I invest the 20% there, then like 20% of something else just disappears. And it's almost like bopping, every time you bop something down, those games, and another one jumps up.
Yeah.
So if that's not balance, then what is? Like, how would that pie chart look? I guess it would look different for everyone, but how would I know that I'm in balance there?
Yeah. So I like to say that balance is 100%. It's giving 100% of yourself to wherever you are. So for the women I work with, you know you're in balance when you are 100% focused at work and then 100% focused at home. I think when you're trying to split yourself into five, you don't show up anywhere at all, really. And when it comes to, you're asking, let's say, okay, practically, like, how do I know how to split my time? How do I know if I should be taking on another volunteering opportunity or if I should be saving that time for myself to be going to bed earlier? Like, if you want to get really practical, like you said, it's different for every person. It's really, really personal. And again, I think that turning inwards for a lot of the answers is where you're going to find a lot of guidance. There's also massive value in turning outwards and like finding that mentor or that person that you're able to turn to talk these things through. But you always want to come being able to fully represent yourself, like present your side, ask your question, in with your full truth. And so have to be able to turn inwards first. But Esther, you want me to make, schedules for people I never met? That's very difficult.
Yeah, it never worked out because the truth is, I worked with a coach once who did actually give me that pie thing and said, make sure that you've got about 20% in each category and you're good.
Really?
Yeah, but I found that trying to keep up that 20% in each category was so stressful and I did try, I really did, that I just felt so out of balance from the effort of just trying to stay in balance.
Yeah.
So this definitely sounds more feasible to make sure that whatever you've chosen to do with all the processes that you've described, what do I want, that I'm giving it 100%. Something that you definitely would need to be very good at in order to do that is saying no. Because in order to put 100%
Yeah.
into something, you're saying no to everything else. Like when you said about the stack of sweaters in the closet, I was thinking of like my closet, which has a stack of sweaters and a million things like stuck in between. And it's possible that my time sometimes looks like that as well. Like, oh, I'll do this, but I'll also do these three things at the same time. Um, so how can we learn to say no so that we can give that 100% where we've chosen to?
Yeah. It's so hard. Um, it's so hard because like we've been wired against it. Um, and I think that it very often comes from a really, really good place. Some things that help me are getting really, 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 really clear on my priorities and my standards for myself. So I have a standard for myself that I don't do overwhelm. I don't do it. And so this helps sometimes when I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. It's just like, that's not a thing I do. It helps sometimes just to know that, like,
What do you
this
mean
is
by
not
that? I don't do
something that.
overwhelm. Is that like a practical thing or an emotional thing?
So it's both. Sometimes it's an emotional thing, meaning when I'm starting to feel overwhelmed and I'm just like, I don't do overwhelm. And that helps me like, oh, right, okay, the gears kick in and it's like deep breaths, whatever it is, but it helps remind me that like I get to choose to say no, thank you, to overwhelm. That's on the emotional side. On the practical side, if I don't do overwhelm and then someone asks me to take something on and I know it will be overwhelming, it's helpful sometimes as like, I cannot say yes to this because it's just like I have my standards. And listen, I say yes to overwhelming things all the time. Sometimes knowing it's going to be overwhelming, sometimes not. I just miscalculate, like we all do, and then I have to like deal with it after the fact. But going in knowing that my goal for myself is to not be overwhelmed, and while that's really internal work, it helps to not overwhelm myself with too many things crammed into my time. That could help. Something that helps really, really practically is, like I said, planning my time in advance. I'm super, super into building my schedule in advance, and I don't always stick to it. I'm not very rigid about it, but it helps me just lay out my time and see what there is to work with. And if my schedule is full and you ask me to take something on, I might say yes. But then someone else asks me to take something on, and I know that it has to be a no because I'm already overbooked. And so just practically knowing how many hours of activities you have scheduled into your day, which most people do not know. They think they know, and they are wrong, as studies have proven time and again, is really helpful because like sometimes it's not even a struggle to say no because you think it's an easy yes because you have no idea that you're overbooked. And the last thing that I would say is maybe a little bit less practical, but just a reminder that you get to choose how you feel, and you get to choose how you spend your time. And so when you have the opportunity to say yes to something or to say no, remember that it comes along with a lot of stuff. And so saying yes might come along with, like, I don't know, recognition and social opportunities and things that might develop out of saying yes to this thing. And saying no might come along with a disappointment of missing out on whatever it is. And it might come along with the opportunity to feel present in the things that you're doing, or to not fail your next report, or to actually get some sleep at night. And just like weighing the pros and cons, and remembering that you get to choose to take care of yourself, and you get to choose to take care of your well-being, and that includes your emotional well-being. And if you need to say no to something, to say no. And that doesn't mean to never stretch yourself, and to never, step out of your comfort zone, and to never give beyond what's, absolutely comfortable. We're not talking about, like, lounging in a king size bed and just, from the pillow, no, no, knowing. But when something is not right for you and is not feasible and is going to negatively impact your ability to take care of yourself, even just emotionally, because it's not just, you deserve to say no to that.
So having your standards very clear, and then it's very easy to say no, because you're asking me to lower my standards, and I'm not gonna do that. That's a big one.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's always very easy to say no, but it definitely
Mm.
helps. I'm sure as a mother you relate. Like, there are times when I'm like, I could say yes, and I know that I'm going to be working on this project when my kids are home, and I'm going to be snapping at them. Like, the project just sounds way less enticing.
Yeah, yeah. When you know what the whole package deal is, and you're
Yeah.
realistic with yourself about it, and you know what's important to you, then it becomes much easier to say no. Very true. Very
Yeah.
true. Obviously, if there's like certain deep-seated challenges going on, then it could be harder to say no. Like very low self-worth or things like that. Um, but yeah, getting yourself in a good place so that you can do that.
Yeah.
I have this question that I've had for a long time. When it comes to balance and finding this piece when it comes to productivity, which you would really think are two totally opposite things. Um, what I've noticed is that a lot of people, successful people, will start by throwing themselves into something in a very unbalanced way, in a very extreme way. They'll sacrifice a lot of things along the way, and that's how they get to their success. That's how they get the top of the class. That's how they get into the best seminary, whatever it is. That's how they become an expert. And then once they've gotten there, they start to prioritize balance, and they start to like preach balance. I don't use that word, but um, and it's like, well, what if I want to be where you are? I've always thought this, like, I don't think I could get to where you are without first lowering my standards, going all into something, even if it's not totally aligned with my health and with my emotional well-being. And I actually remember that there was this woman who I followed. Looked up to her a lot. She was very successful in her career, and I would follow her email chains. And then one time she wrote this whole thing about kind of like balance, and I emailed her back. I didn't think she was ever going to answer, saying, easy for you to talk. Like, you didn't get there that way, and now you're saying that everyone should do that. And she wrote back. She wrote back to me a few months later, but she did write back, which was basically kind of like, yeah, but it could have been so much better if I hadn't done it that way. But I'm not so convinced. So, what do you think about someone who is very ambitious and wants to be the top in their field, wants to do something that is unconventional, and doesn't believe that balance will be able to get them there?
This is such a good question, Esther.
This is my big question.
Um,
I've been asking it of
it's a big
myself a long
question.
time. Yeah.
I don't know that there's an answer. I think there's a conversation to be had. Um, I'll tell you some things that I'm thinking. I think it's really
Yeah.
personal, So, like, I think each person in their specific circumstances with their specific ambition, um, can look and can discuss, what it means to them. I'll just share with you some things that are coming up for me, but I don't know that I have an answer. And what's interesting is that this scenario is exactly what, like, it's my, I don't know what the word is, my like poster story for how my LifeWorks business came to be, which was that when we were first married, I was always making comments to my husband, like, now I'm doing the work, so that in 10 years, I'm going to be making 10 times what all my friends are making. I'm going to be working half the time, and like, I'm going to be so available and so present. And then I got fed up with that. And I was like, but I don't want to be not present now so that I could be present in 10 years. And it's actually interesting that Chovos Halvavos talks about exactly this. Can I bring in this reference?
Yes, please.
He says that many people say, I'm going to work hard now and devote myself completely to my business now, so that in the future, I will be able to dedicate my time to Torah learning and mitzvos and serving Hashem. And he says that that is an extremely foolish thing to do, because you are taking a loan that you have no idea you'll be able to pay back. And maybe it's a morbid thought, but what Chovos Halvavos is saying, you're saying, God, give me these years to dedicate to my business, these years to build up my wealth, these years, to build my house and buy my car and get my degree and establish my business, so that in the future I can serve you. Who's to say you have a future? You don't know that you do.
You're borrowing your own time.
Yeah. You're saying, give me this time for me, so then I'll give my future time to you, but you don't know that you have future time to give back. And so you're taking a loan you don't know you could repay. And this is something that I remind myself of time and again. It's not as clear-cut a scenario, and life is never black and white like that. But whenever I am fully investing my present for my future, I think it's something to just examine and question or talk over with someone, because who's to say I have a future? Again, it's like morbid, and at the same time we have to balance that with, we want to be responsible and we want to be making those responsible decisions, which is why I think it's really something to discuss, particularly with someone wise. But again, to me, it's just something to think about. And it's not just who's to say I have a future, but how do I know exactly what my future will look like and what I will want in the future? And is it worth completely sacrificing what I have now for just something that's unknown? I don't know, I don't know what's going to be in 10 years, and I don't know what I'm going to want, and I don't know what my life is going to need of me or what I'm going to want in my life. And so to completely sacrifice my present, I don't know if that's ever something that would be recommended. I don't know. Again, I think this is really personal and really something that has to be hashed out. But is there ever a time for going all in and sacrificing balance for the payouts? I would say yes, even though it's hard for me to say, but I'm also very ambitious and very driven, and so I totally get that. I totally get that, and I think that I would say that if we're really saying that balance is something you feel and it's not something you have and it's not something on your calendar, then it doesn't have to be that would be a contradiction to balance. It's hard to imagine that it would really come with a complete sense of balance and inner peace. But to a certain extent, if you're making that decision really, really consciously, and you know what you're giving up and you're able to embrace that, and you know what it's going to require of you and you're choosing that, I think that's definitely a lot better than diving into a journey and then finding yourself in over your head and just continuing along because you have no idea how to get yourself out of the mess. I definitely think that it's, the conscious decision and knowledge of what you're getting yourself into is a huge step up. And sometimes I think it could be worth it. It could be worth it to invest time or energy or resources or whatever it is in going all in on something. But I definitely think that it's worth exploring, especially exploring what the sacrifice is.
Needs to come from a good place, from a healthy place.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to definitely wake up seeing you're trying to fill a bunch of holes that you were just avoiding, I guess. I did a workshop this past week, and I had a girl ask me, because I was speaking about the importance of friendship and how that actually impacts our physical health. And she raised her hand. She's like, but is it fine if I put all friends on hold for 4 years because I really need it, and no friendships for 4 years, and then afterwards I'll, and I told her I think she'll regret it. But the truth is that it's possible that there are some people who have a certain personality also and find things so important that they've chosen that they know the consequences going in, that that it is worth it for them. But
Yeah.
like Elon Musk, I'm thinking of him because I was just seeing something with him. Like, he is totally unbalanced, and I don't think he'd want it to be any other way. But you have to
Right.
look at Elon Musk, be like, do I want to actually live? Like, do I want to be like that? Because that's the cost of that.
Yeah.
Wow, it's given me a lot of clarity right now. Wow.
Yeah. Esther, I want to say two additional things. One is because you phrase this question as like, I'm looking at someone really successful and I want to be them, but it will take a lack of balance to get there. I, I know that it's sometimes, it could be hard to see, but I don't think that there's never an alternative route. And maybe it's a little bit slower, or maybe it will look different than their journey. But even for a girl to say, for the next 4 years, I want to focus all in on my career and have no friendships. Do you really need no friendships? Can I get that it's not a priority and it's not most of your time, but like, can you have that like once a week or once every other week, non-negotiable 10-minute phone call, one coffee date, like, and so I think just like exploring the options, even if it means they come at a cost. So meaning maybe my journey will be slower than hers, but maybe that's worth it for me because I don't want to lose as many friends as she lost. And usually um, the successful person is not putting those losses on display.
Mm,
And you don't get to
mm.
see necessarily the ugly side of their going all in and and what it cost them. And so you see where they are and you want to get there, and so you want to copy paste their journey, but do you really want to? And you are two different people, and have two different personalities and two different makeups and two different histories and two different futures. And so copy pasting someone's journey, it's always a little bit risky. But I would especially say to just look at the cost and look at the sacrifice and really make sure that that's for you.
I actually think that finding that middle route is harder, because you can either be like, I'm going all in. I don't have to think about it. Like, I'm going all in, just saying no to everything else.
Right.
Or you could say, I'm not doing this at all, which is also like, the cost is too much. I'm just not going to do it at all. That middle of being like, well, what if I just take the slower route? Which I think is coming back to balance. That's choosing to feel balanced. I think that's in a way harder, especially for somebody who's very ambitious. And so that's almost
Yeah,
comforting. It's
for
almost
sure.
comforting because you're not lazy, you're not quitting, you're not making excuses. You're actually taking the hard away.
Yeah.
That's comforting.
You're making me think, Esther, of a tightrope walker who represents balance, right? And I think that when we say the word balance, we tend to just envision this like very steady, very flat, straight, balance. But a tightrope walker is actually swaying side to side. They lean a little bit to the right and then pull back to the left and then back to the right and back to the left. And I think that dance of balance, like you're saying, it's really hard. Like the tightrope walker cannot space out, can't take a break, can't pause for a rest, or they will tumble. And that's essentially what we're doing when we're not going completely to one side or completely to the other, and we're trying to keep it in the middle. It's a really, really delicate dance of like a little to the right and pulling back to the left and then back here and back there. And doing that dance it's difficult. Um, it's real work. It's real work that I think in very many cases has the most rewarding, fulfilling dividends, but it's real work.
So I end off with a question. If you had a time machine that could take you back to a random point when you were living by yourself, not at home, you weren't married yet, and you could tell yourself one thing, only one thing, what would you tell yourself?
Mm. I would tell myself to really take advantage of the opportunity to learn from other people. I think that it's such a breeding ground for learning from other people, because you're not like at home, which is where you're like a little bit boxed in by just all the preconceived notions you have, all the patterns you've been raised with. They're familiar, and they might be amazing and beautiful, and you might want to take them with you always. but they a little bit act as blinders when there are people who are different or who do things differently than you. And then when you leave home, in some ways you're able to just see that more. I think because you're not in that place where like everything is so familiar, and just learn from the people around you. Different is not always bad. And there's so much to learn, even if it's what you don't want to do. There's just so much value in really being with other people and experiencing things with them and learning from them.
I said it was the last question, but now I have another question. Did you have anyone do you have anyone who is a role model to you of living a balanced life? You don't have to share who it is, but is that something you learned from other people that was modeled to you, or did you have to learn it from scratch?
I don't think I had any one role model. I had bits and pieces, but really, really, what always was like my guiding light was the moments where I felt it for myself. And I was like, that's what I want to always feel. So it could have been a really good day, or it could have just been a split second. I have like those, I call them, some of them, threshold moments, where you're experiencing this thing, and like very often it's with a decision, and you are literally at the threshold. Like sometimes you don't even know at the time. And then looking back, you're like, oh, right? Like that was my first step into this massive journey, or that was my first step into this massive transformation. And so for me, it was those moments that really, they served as like the inspiration for what I was working towards.
Oh, Chana, thank you very much. Thanks for answering my question. My big question. I've never asked it out loud before. Always just secretly wondered. And
I don't have an answer, but I hope that I always say, like, there's no answer. There's perspective.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, I got a new perspective there. I got a whole new perspective today. So thank you. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Esther. This was so fun.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of On Your Own. If you like this episode or think it will be useful to someone else, please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. I would love to connect with you. If you've got any questions, feedback, or ideas for future episodes, you can email me at onyourownpodcast@gmail.com. See you next week. And in the meantime, happy adulting.